Good afternoon, everybody. So wonderful to have so many of you join us here online. I'm Philip Steenkamp, President and Vice Chancellor of Royal Roads University, and I'm going to be your host today. I'd like to begin by welcoming Dr. Satwinder Kaur Bains, today's Asian Heritage Month keynote speaker, and I'm going to introduce Dr. Bains in just a moment. I'd also like to welcome and share my thanks to Head of Human Rights and Accessibility, Alejandro Campos Garcia, who organized today's event, which I know many of you have been looking forward to, as have I. And just a big warm welcome to everybody who's joined us. We always like to begin in a good way at Royal Roads by acknowledging our presence here on the lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. And it is indeed with great gratitude that we live, work, and learn on these lands each and every day. And, you know, what a beautiful day to be out here on these incredible lands. I would say spring is here without a doubt, but in fact, summer arrived. Summer seems to have arrived early as well. But it's a beautiful day to be on this campus and also to reflect on the enduring relationship that Indigenous communities have had with these lands from time immemorial. So before we get going, just a few housekeeping items. For those of you online, your microphones have been muted, but feel free to ask questions using the chat, and Alejandro will read them out during the Q&A portion of the program. And of course, feel free to leave your cameras on or off, although I would say it's always nice to see a few friendly faces when you are making a presentation. So Asian Heritage Month is a very special time here at Royal Roads as we join people across Canada in recognizing and in celebrating the contributions of Asian communities, including here at Royal Roads. And this year we invited a few members of our Asian student community to gather and share their favorite food at a potluck. And you'll find those videos on our Asian Heritage Month webpage posted in the chat. I encourage you all to have a look if you haven't had a chance yet. You'll also find the library's digital display, which showcases Asian voices and representation in popular media, contemporary experiences of anti-racism, anti-Asian racism, climate vulnerability and sustainable development in Asia, and stories of immigration and injustice. And in fact, we had Minister Sana at our John Horgan campus on Friday, and in the Student Learning Commons there was a wonderful display of books available through the library, which cataloged much of the Asian experience in Canada. So we are recording today's event, and that recording will be available in the days ahead as well. So with that, I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Satwinder Kaur Bains. Dr. Bains is Professor Emeritus in the School of Culture, Media and Society, College of the Arts at the University of the Fraser Valley. She recently retired as an award-winning director of the South Asian Studies Institute and as an associate professor. So welcome, Dr. Bains. It's a great pleasure to have you here with us today, and happy Asian Heritage Month. And I will pass it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Steenkamp, for that beautiful introduction. And thank you also to Dr. Campos Garcia for stick handling this till this moment. And now, hopefully, it'll be what you expect it to be. I welcome everyone that joined from far and wide. I'm very pleased to be presenting to you as part of Asian Heritage Month. So today's talk is really about South Asian Canadians, their journeys, and how those journeys shape today's successes as well as challenges. Of course, I'm looking forward to the question and answer as well. And I just want to start also by, this will, of course, never work. Okay, here it is. Of course, foregrounding the work of Asian communities in BC and Canada through foregrounding the Indigenous truth of our knowledge and what we know. And of course, in the valley here, the Stockmuk people, the Halkomelem speaking people who have lived here for time immemorial, want to look at our migration, not just starting in 1897, but that we came to a place that was already inhabited and already thriving, and that our own culpability and our own positions as settlers on this land So I want to start with acknowledging that as my position as well. And of course, happy to celebrate Asian Heritage Month in May of 2026. So I'm going to start a little history lesson just to get people's minds thinking about what we're going to be talking about. South Asia is a very large and diverse geographical, political, economic, social, and cultural, religious communities of people that live. There are 8 countries, about 2 billion people. And of course, we have a large South Asian Canadian diaspora in Canada, which measures at about 2.57 according to the last census. So this kind of gives you a sense of everything I'm going to say has to be taken with a bit of a grain of salt, because there is so much diversity within the communities that anything I'm going to say will be kind of a general overview, and I'll try to bring more particular moments into the conversation as well. So I want to start with just the idea of migration to Canada, established in 1897 as the first numbers of people that came. We don't have a lot of records, but this was very much a white man's province. And as you can see, the labor that people put in to come to this country was based on economies of scale. So really, it was an economic migration in the first few years, and until the 60s and 70s, and then things shaped up a little bit differently. So the first migrations, give us insight into what people were coming into, what they were actually receiving and coming into Canada. And it is a very fraught and challenged history. It's also an omitted and erased history from the Canadian record. So the work we've been doing over the last 20 years, 25 years, has been to create that Canadian record. So I also want to say right at the beginning that this history is not unique just to South Asian Canadians. This is a history that was repeated towards Japanese Canadians, Doukhobors, Ukrainians, people of other Eastern European communities, the Chinese community. So this is not unique to us, but unfortunately, the way the Canadian record has been written, it's been siloed a lot, and we haven't seen the connected threads between communities. And so now in the next 20, 25 years, we hope to start projects, and we've started a little bit of that around intercultural alliance building with communities, so that we can see the kind of impact of early migration and the racism that happened at the time, the legislation that was passed affecting a vast number of people. And as you may know, redress has become something that communities are looking for from government, from communities, from public institutions. So settlement and adaptation into Canada was, as you can imagine, difficult. In the early 1900s, there was people who were settling in big cities, in small towns and villages. This is a little bit of a collection we have on Lake Cowichan. The Cowichan Valley was one of the early settlements of people from 1903 onwards. So you'll see on the left-hand side is a map of Paldi, which is very much a multicultural, intercultural community, the first of its kind, we believe, in Canada. And the people who lived there were, from Japanese, Chinese, Indigenous, European settlers. There was communities of people who were coming and going, and it was a sawmill town. It is now a ghost town. It doesn't really exist anymore because of a number of factors. There were fires, and then bigger sawmills happened around the island. So it's near Duncan, quite near Duncan. If anybody would like to visit, there's a small museum and a small Sikh temple there. So we start with this because this is kind of where people found their roots and found their settlements. And of course, in the early years, they were mostly bachelor societies of only men, because my immigration did not allow families to settle. So as I said earlier, the economic migration was really about going back and not settling in Canada. So they were also coming to make some money, send it back home, create better land holdings back home in India. And the largest migration in the early 1900s was from India, not from the other 7 countries. So here are some numbers. There's about 129 years of history. From 1904 to 1908, you'll see about 5,179 people came, and you can see how the numbers started to increase. And at the bottom, I have a 2021 census figures about what we see from 2021. There'll be a new census in 26, so we'll get some new updated numbers. So we think there's a population of over about 500,000, a little bit over 600 perhaps now, that are in the Lower Mainland, Vancouver, Abbotsford, Surrey. And Abbotsford, where I come from, is one of the most diverse communities in terms of population for Canada. And the second largest South Asian population is in Abbotsford. So when we started the work in let's say 2006, we really wanted to see how we could understand our history. There wasn't a lot of information that we could pull from. There were white European secular writers and authors and academics who had done the work, but there wasn't a lot of insider writing going on. So we really had to look at how we would bring forward the history of our migration patterns and create themes for the work that we're going to do and to build a strong archive. On the left, you'll see the cartoon from the Vancouver Sun talking about how BC immigration policy was very racist in terms of how it was presented, but how it was also promulgated within both the province, the municipalities, and the federal government. So how do we tell that story by understanding what was going on within white settler communities as colonialists? So the story of the West was certainly seen as a story of journey, not so much a story of permanency. Everybody felt that there was a temporariness to their lives, and there was this myth in their minds of return, but there was a threat of return as well. As you can imagine, the conversations that were going on, the public opinion, like the media and the legislature, the West was seen for certain groups of people as temporary, not as permanent. That's partly why women and children were not allowed to settle with their family members. And the West, of course, was a daughter colony. The British had a very much a stake in Canada. And the displacement and colonization history was also not written in a way that presented the truth at that time. So the West as white, as being predominantly white, as dominant cultures of both the French and the English, and then the trope of the foreigner, the settler, the immigrant was constantly being put out, and people of color, even Eastern European people were included in that number, were seen as outsiders, as foreigners. And of course, the last area we really wanted to focus on was the idea of erasure and the idea of omission and neglect. And that it's still there. We are nowhere near inclusion to the full degree, but the work continues around making sure that erasure is addressed. And so I just wanted to bring you a small snippet from that time, from 1907, that this conflict of empire that was really, Canada was being settled as a Anglo-Saxon community, a country for Anglo-Saxons, and that anyone else who came here came to serve that community through their labor. And the idea of assimilation as a policy was certainly upfront and very vocal. And the idea of supremacy and hegemony was very, very clear. So this was not something in a hidden agenda. This was clearly elucidated and shared with everyone. So we, in 1907, the Asiatic League was quite overtly racist, and there was a big, as you may or may not know, there was a big riot in Vancouver on Powell Street in Japantown, in Chinatown. And we, in 2022, took us that many years to really go around the province and really understand the history of South Asian migration. And it took us, I would say, 5 years to cross 7 regions in the province to understand where our history intersected with white European settler history and the idea of colonization. And this exhibit was then put at the Royal BC Museum. And so the museum, which is supposed to be the museum of the history of BC and the people who settled here, was again, culpable in being a tool of erasure. So there was a huge omission, even in the sawmill industry, which was full of South Asians working in the sawmill industry. There was no mention of their labor. There was no photograph. There was nothing showing up in the exhibit. So this exhibit to go to the Royal BC Museum was a big deal for us to get there and to we brought about 100 people in to do an intervention. And there's a film, if you are so inclined to watch, called Unarchived. And in the film by the National Film Board, we talk about how the archive does not give any kind of credit to people of color. So, why Canada? There was these push and pull factors, why people came to Canada. The photograph you see is from the 1907 riot on Powell Street. You'll see the Japanese businesses are being attacked. On the very right, you'll see a Sikh gentleman standing along with the police. There was a lot of damage and done to the businesses in the area. So migration had these push and pull factors coming to Canada early 1900s. I'm just going to share a few of them. I mean, cheap labor, as I've mentioned earlier, colonialism had already gone to these countries. Those people from those countries were coming to Canada. And it was, again, the idea of temporariness. People were going to stay for 5 years or less or more and go back. So the British had some sort of control over that movement, because while people had British passports and they were called British subjects, not British citizens, there was a second-class citizenship going on and third-class citizenship, but also there was different laws and different rules based on your color of your skin, where you came from. And you may have heard of the Komagadamaroo, the ship that was returned back. And that law was passed, the continuous journey law was passed, so that people could not actually come from a country that did not have a continuous journey to Canada. So there was a way to create a law, because at the time, England was still ruling India. So they didn't want to upset India to that degree, but they could pass a law in Canada that did not actually single them out, but in a sense was directed at them. So these are some of the slides I have just around the period of time, what was going on. So the early years, racism, labor and social discrimination, people couldn't get jobs, the kind of jobs they got paid a quarter less than everybody else. The refusal for the Komagadamaroo landing and the right to vote was taken away. It's more egregious in a sense, because people did have the right to vote as British subjects, but they were actually excluded by law through the city of Vancouver, and that vote was taken away for 40 years. And then there was these quiet years. While women did come and join some of the men here, not all women came. Those that were allowed came to migrate, but there was intense political and social campaigns to get the government to change their minds on some of the racist laws that they had created. And then there was the post-war era in 1951. After 1947, when India got its independence, you started to see a shift in policy where they were no longer subjected to the British subject rule, but that they could come as independent people from a republic. And then the 1970s, which is the multicultural bulge, when the policies in Canada were being promulgated around race and equity. And so, of course, migration increased with family reunification as part of the Geneva Convention. And the third migration wave came in the 1900s till the present time. And I'll share a little bit later about how that continues. So the work that I'm showing you now is just not the only pieces we have. I just want to show you a quick picture, a quick view of what we have done over the last 24, 25 years of building our histories, our stories, our community records in a way that we are already 50 years too late. We started doing this in 2006. We should have been started doing this in 70s or 80s, because a lot of people have passed away and some of these stories are second and third hand. But now we have a nice conglomerate and aggregate view of our migration histories, our settlement histories, our adaptation histories, our contributions, our challenges, our successes. And then hopefully we can pass that down to the next generations, because if they don't know their history, they really are buffeted by much stronger winds than we expect them to. So this work has been ongoing and continues to evolve. And there has been, I wouldn't say a massive groundswell to do this work. I must suggest that the work of history and heritage and preservation is a bit of a luxury for people who have passed beyond the settlement stages. So there's not this amazing onslaught at us. We really have to go and search for this and make people aware. Once they're aware, of course, the work starts. So I'm going to show you a few slides of what we've collected over the last few years. We really have looked at protest as a way to get your rights back. And you may have heard of the Canadian Farm Workers Union. So the union work and the work within labor has been really critically important, because people have risen to the top. On the left-hand side on my screen, you see Raj Chauhan, who is now the Speaker of the House, who helped get the farm workers to get the rights that they deserved. So we have really worked at creating history records of through labor, through the lens of labor. And we've also looked at international movements. So the diaspora, the South Asian Canadian diaspora, is very, very active in community building, and they are very invested in home politics, in home economics, in home culture, social heritage, religion. So being involved in movements across the waters, across the oceans is nothing new for the community. Okay. And so we've worked to build a digital archive, as I've suggested. We don't have the space to collect a lot of materials like museums do. So all of this is digital, and Amara will be happy to hear that there's now, about 20,000 images that have been uploaded and photographs and stuff. And now we have a 3 million photograph collection that we're going through of one man over 30 years who created an ethnographic history of South Asians in Vancouver and the Lower Mainland. We've also looked at educational resources for K-12 so that the students in the classroom, as Philip suggested earlier, representation is really important, and that students see themselves reflected in the curriculum, see the stories as important in the classroom to help teachers build curriculum. So Saffron Threads is another project that we've undertaken. And the digital archive is replete and rich with historical records that we've unearthed. And I must say that the archive is, while satisfying, it's also very stressful, because the old archive, when you look at the Vancouver Public Library or the Victoria Library, or we look at other archives, the archivists of that time were, limited, I would say, I'm being kind, limited in their approach and how they present the history of South Asians. And we've had to both the labor of not just presenting the archive, but correcting the archive as well, and resurrecting it and creating a better view to the archive. That's been a huge amount of labor from our side. And of course, so heartened by the archive because it reflects family, community, mobility. You'll see this one family on the left-hand side that seems to be much more assimilated in terms of how they're dressed, what they're wearing. All of them have haircuts, they seem to be. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see a more settled, younger settler, maybe family that's coming in. So there's been a diversity of experiences that we have been so fortunate to find and create for the community, so that the community can have these records. Otherwise, they're in people's homes and we may never see them again. And of course, building resilience. And resilience is a very difficult word in the sense that we are always having to build resilience, and you can get tired from doing that. And I think it is unfair that everybody is expected to be resilient against so many odds. But there it is that people persevered and continued and had babies and got together and lived in community and supported each other. And there's a huge amount of now research on that work going on. And so the archive is something that is fairly young. It's a South Asian Canadian digital archive. So we hope to cover all of Canada in, I don't know how many years that will take, but it is a constant questioning and answering for ourselves. How do we build interest? As I said to you earlier, heritage work is slog work. How do you ensure sustainability? How do we imagine what the archive might look in 5 to 10 years? So the contemporary efforts are to preserve the history, definitely, to unearth it, to preserve it, to record it, to understand it. And I really want to say our built heritage, everything we see around us, to understand where it came from and how it got here, and collecting works of importance and significance, but also documenting our memories and experiences, second, third hand oral histories, however we do that, storytelling, all that needs to be recorded. And of course, gathering to build our future, and of course, learning and unlearning our past, present, and future. And so I had some images of people, and I want to talk about identity. The South Asian community is very, very, very diverse, and we are everywhere, and we are not visible anywhere. Sometimes we're hyper visible at certain points, and then we are invisible in so many points. But you may have heard of Allegiance. The lead is a Punjabi South Asian woman actor, and then you may have heard of Vivek Shreya, who's an artist who is trans, and then Karan Aujla, who is grew up in Abbotsford, who is a big star and won Juno Awards. And so I just want to give you the kind of breadth of our identities and our experiences to say that everything everybody else is experiencing, we are also experiencing, and that there isn't this idea of essentialism that should go on. We should really embrace the diversity of our experiences. And here we have, the idea of the model minority around issues of race and gender and class, but Senator Jaffer, who came as a refugee, Senator Marwaha, who was vice president of Bank of Nova Scotia, and Lieutenant Governor Lakhani, who was also from the Muslim community. So again, such a diversity in experiences and contributions. And I'm getting closer and closer to 2:30, so I'm trying to race through this. But this idea of where are you from, and I've given you this 129-year kind of view, insider view, and like what was going on at the time. It's so quick, such a quick recap, really. But the question of where you are from is never an innocent question, as Kamlavi Viswaram has written, and yet this idea that how do you answer that question? And of course, all of us who are people of color have experienced that question. And I thought this quote was so beautifully written in the sense that you're neither Indian nor wholly American, and the question always provokes a sudden failure of confidence, the fear of never replying adequately. So even now, after 129 years, you might get the question, where are you really from? And then modernity and the idea of caretaking of tradition, as much as I want to suggest to you that we have had great successes, and yes, we have, and I don't want to take that away from us, there's still also the idea of conflict. We've been excluded from the national belonging in Canada through the sedimentary layer of how we are seen and who we are. And of course, racism, sexism, they continue. Racialization is ongoing. There is also, we are stacked from the internal and the external. I'm always saying some of my work it's very loaded, because not only do I have to work and love to work and want to work within dominant communities to educate and make aware and do the work and teaching, whatever I do in the research, I also have this big responsibility of what is happening internally within the South Asian community, and the ideas of tradition and patriarchy and colonialism and sexism, all this, even diasporic nostalgia, the nostalgia of where we were and the amnesia of what we really don't want to remember are constantly haunting us. And the honorary status of not being. This is really something I've experienced, and others may have experienced also, that we get, oh, she's just like us. She's not really, and negating my own who I am and my being in terms of who I am. And of course, internally, rejecting the dominant gaze, looking to find solidarity within the communities that you belong to. And this idea of tradition, remapping this cultural production all the time, constantly, within community. It is a lot of work. It's unpaid and sometimes not so appreciated, but living between the tension of both the imposed and the intertwined identities, and of course, resistance along the way. So the South Asian Canadian spectrum is, and I'm going to stop soon, but the early migrants, their great-grandchildren, we have fourth and fifth generation South Asian Canadians who are as Canadian as apple pie or whatever, maybe poutine or whatever it is that we call ourselves. And then the multicultural bulge, which came in the 70s, which is what I am part of. And then this large bulge of children who are the second generation cohort that are born in Canada. For them, South Asia, where they come from, is really an imaginary tale. And they may never have even stepped foot in those lands, but they are the large bulge of children that are the children of the 1970s. And then the entrepreneurial economic class from the 1980s onwards, and then new immigrants who are, as you all know, with the fraught immigration policy, who are arriving even as we speak. And while they come to fill the roles that Canadians may not want to fill, both in terms of labor and economics, they are still vilified all the time. And then the international students as a university, I don't need to tell you more about that. So these are the kind of cohorts of 6 groupings and so when I talk about South Asia, it's hard to say everything about everybody. You can imagine the diversity within those communities and among those communities. So just giving you a quick snapshot rather than giving you a full view. So I'll stop here, and I'm actually at 2:30. So I've really raced and gone through my slides. And I hope I've given you a little bit of an insight, but I would be happy to share the slides with anyone if they would like to see them. I would encourage you to look at our websites. The South Asian Canadian Heritage website is a very large website that holds a lot of material. It would be a pleasure for anyone to go and look at what we've researched over the number of years and have recorded. And we're very proud of the record, because it's the first time that we've actually made room for ourselves without asking for permission. So I will stop here and let Dr. Steenkamp take it from here.
Dr. Bains, thank you so much for that kaleidoscopic overview. I hope we didn't hurry you because I
No,
know
no, it's
there's a
fine.
lot. Yeah.
It's a lot in each slide. I could do a whole class on each slide, but it just to give you a quick overview and to always suggest and always recommend that everything you see, take it with a grain of salt. Obviously, it's my worldview and what I've done, but please be open to the individual experience and be open to meeting people at where they are and where they are coming from, rather than your own imposed and assumed ideas of who they are.
Yeah. Well, just thank you again. And I just actually also wanted to congratulate you on this remarkable work you've done over a number of decades now, to record, preserve, promote Asian heritage in British Columbia. It's an extraordinary body of work. I think we just got a little bit of a glimpse of it today. So I wanted to start off just by noting that, and also encouraging people who have participated in this presentation today to take a look at some of those resources. We will circulate those links for sure.
Yes, please.
We're going to open this up to audience questions, and I just remind folks to pop questions into the chat so Alejandro can read them out. And while people are doing that, maybe I could just start off with a couple, one or two. That page you had on modernity and tradition, I think we could have spent an hour just talking about that.
Yes.
And but just something as you were talking sort of struck me, this latest issue around international students and the way in which a narrative developed in the country, sort of blaming international students for the housing crisis and the stresses we've seen in our social services and healthcare systems and things like that. Can you draw a line sort of in that narrative from what you've seen in your history? I mean, it takes a different form, but that there was a xenophobic kind of quality to a lot of that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is an ongoing trope, though, within Canada, Philip. Like the early migrants that came to build the railways and build the Trans-Canada highways, etc. When the last spike was driven, if you look at the photograph of the last spike, there is not a Chinese person in view. They died on those tracks, and at some point, other people take advantage of what someone else's labor has produced. And for international students, I think we have done a great injustice to the conversation, to the narrative, to our beautiful Canadian image as well. It has been dragged through the mud in the last little while. Students have seen their promises that the government has made to them unfulfilled. And even universities and post-secondary is culpable at some level. We need the birth and death rate, as you know, in Canada doesn't support its own economic needs, right? Like we have to bring people in. This is not a choice. This is not like, oh, should we or shouldn't we? Like we just have to. There's no other choice. And so when people come to fill roles and they come to be educated in Canada, we give them a legal pathway to do that work. But to find that legal pathway fraught with challenges and fraught with barriers and fraught with assumptions, stereotypes, discrimination, racism, assessment, everything along the way, exploitation within the internal communities as well as in the external communities. I think our narrative has been tinged with both sadness, as frustration, anger, suicides. It is the line is a very strong line that's been drawn around what Canada really needs and what it projects itself to want. And we really need to have that conversation, because a person with a PhD said to me, if Canada would only have told me when I applied for immigration that as a PhD scholar, that when I come there, they really just want me to go work at a 7-Eleven. I would have thought about applying. But he said, when I'm told they want PhDs, it doesn't mean that they want PhDs. So I think we have been disingenuous in our approaches. I'm sorry I'm being so blunt, but there has been, there have been real challenges with international students. And I don't think that we've seen the end of the story yet.
Yeah, but thank you for your candor there too, because it has been really disturbing to see what has happened. And I noticed too, you talked about the culpability of universities here as well. And maybe I could ask you the sort of question about sort of looking ahead. What do you think is the most important responsibility for universities, like ours, but yours as well, in dealing with these issues, and then in also protecting and promoting Asian heritage?
Mhm. I think number one, the universities need to be speaking to government in a much stronger, much forthright, uh, relationship building rather than transactional way. So it's not seen as money exchanging hands, but people's lives exchanging hands.
Mm,
I think the universities have a role to play as leaders, as thought makers, as thinkers, as philosophers, as ideas people to promote education. They need to be with government on the conversation. I was disheartened when all the changes that happened to policy happened without university input. It may have happened, but it wasn't obvious. It probably
mm,
happened, but it wasn't obvious. And it felt very disjointed. And I think number one, I think universities need to step up and become part of the machinery of federal government, because education, while it's a provincial responsibility, the feds control this part of that educational journey. And the second, around Heritage Month, I think you're opening minds and being, always being cognizant and aware that people come with preconceived notions. You can't expect people just like that to change. When 95% of the classrooms in the Fraser Valley started being international students, you wouldn't believe the colleagues that I had, you wouldn't believe some of the stuff they were saying. And they were saying it because they had not been made aware, they had not been partnered with, the university had not really involved them in the training around how students coming from other countries think and learn, and how they can be assessed. And we were just applying the same rubric to everyone. And I feel like we have to do that work to get our faculty and staff to understand people of different, and we do it. I'm not saying we don't do it. We do it, but it's not automatic. You can't expect people to automatically just become something else and understand young minds. We are very much a conservative state type of organizational structure, and we need to find room for people to understand shifts and changes and give them time. It's not it can't happen overnight, and we expected, I think, with the high increase of international students, we expected that people would just come on board, and they didn't. They
yeah,
couldn't. They couldn't.
I
And the
think,
students and the others suffered for it.
yeah, that's a very, very good observation, and I think excellent advice for us sort of moving forward. I think a lot of the backlash we see now is because of the failure to have done that work up front as
Yes,
well.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah,
I think we all were living in a little bit of a um, fantasy world, thinking
yes,
these people are going to come, we can welcome them in, and everything's going to be kumbaya. No, it wasn't. The record was broken actually, and no one knew the words to it.
yes. I noticed there are some questions in the chat, and I'm going to hand this over to Alejandro to sort of moderate here. We've
Sure.
got about 20 minutes left, folks, so keep your questions coming, and we'll cover as many as we can. Alejandro, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. There is a question from Nihit Sharma, and the question goes, while we celebrate the successes of South Asian Canadians, there is also a race of anti-South Asian sentiment and bias that affects our sense of safety and belonging. How can individuals and institutions meaningfully address this so the responsibility isn't left to the community alone?
I agree. Thank you for the question. Um, I think systems are very difficult to shift and move, in big ships that need to change overnight and get them to understand their responsibility to community, to who we are. So I think it's not, I agree with you with the very last comment. You said not leave it up to the community. And unfortunately, that sometimes that emotional labor and that hard work ends up being ours to do. I'm still doing it. And I've been doing it since I arrived in 1975. And I feel like I, I'm not, I think we have to take that on. Let's not forget that we do have a role to play. We internally have to do our work. We have to come out and present ourselves, ask to sit at the table, be setting the agenda, asking for accountability and responsibility. But let's not forget that advocacy and activism has to be motivated to do. We have to be motivated to do that. And it takes a lot of courage, takes a lot of time, energy, money to do that type of work. And unfortunately, and fortunately at some level, because of our diversity, it's hard to kind of make a monolith. It's hard to say everyone fits this one mold. We all have internal tensions as well. So I'm not saying we have the perfect answer, that we can find the internal kind of machinery that gets us to understand who we are. And of course, the acting out of our community. So in Abbotsford, the anti-South Asian sentiment is against our young children who were involved in youth and gangs, etc. And for the longest time, we kept telling the schools that they are not living in a bubble. They're living in Canada. They're living in Abbotsford. They're living in this town. So you can't say this is a South Asian community problem, their problem. They are like this. They do this. We have to understand what they're experiencing at school. We have to understand how the teachers react with them. We want to understand their success stories. Are they being promoted up ahead? What is going on? So, it's a multi-pronged approach. We have to create partnerships. I think, to your question, the community has come forward and said, please involve us. We want to affect change. And I would also hazard a guess, no empirical evidence on this, but I would say 90 to 95% of the people are all in step with the idea of a model minority. They're all in step with this upward mobility movement. Let's do well, let's make money, let's look after our children, let's put them to school. There is 5 to 10% of the population that has challenges. And being 2 million strong, 2.5, I expect that. And so we can't be held up to a standard that's so high that we can't even meet it. We have to know there are flaws within our community and that those flaws need addressing. Those flaws need to be questioned. They need to be understood. They need to be aired and opened, and discourse needs to happen. But it can't happen alone. So I would say it can't be left to the community, as you suggest, but I think the community has a big role to play. And I think we are nowhere near saying somebody else should find a panacea for my problems. We have to be in this together. I hope that answers a little bit.
Thank you very much for that. We have another question for Apurva. So curious, how is your journey being in academia as a South Asian educator? And tell us about your life experience to form the community. How's your contribution to the formation of the community?
Good question. We don't have enough time, but my journey has been actually very fulfilling. I'm a bit of an activist, so I don't take things lying down. So I have made sure that I get to sit at the table. To my own peril, meaning that I have had no rest. I have given myself my time, my energy, my knowledge, my skills to ensuring that within my community of people in the university and outside, that they become these pathways for learning. So, I don't know what year, 2000 something, I think before COVID, I got the service award because I was the craziest one probably on campus with the largest number of committees and representing South Asian communities everywhere and doing all the work. So I would say I didn't do it. Nobody held a gun to my head, but it was a very personal challenge and personal fulfillment for me to do that work. However, I would also say that resistance was at every corner. There was no moment that I could say, oh, it's all done. Been doing this for 20 years, all done. No, it's never that neat. It's always resistance at so many corners. Yes, many corners, light was shed on them and they changed. And there was a lot of, outside, internal, external pressures as well as learning going on. I wouldn't take all the credit. I'm not doing that. But I would say I had to be aware that resistance is part of the journey and that's okay. We need to address that resistance as long as we can see it and name it. And the other piece I think is that in the Valley, where the community, whatever you want to call that, the community was really invested in post-secondary. And to sell education was so easy. to tell them we were here to share knowledge, etc., doors just opened and opened and opened and opened. And we became a partner with the community. We became one with, we're a little off the beaten path in terms of geography. We're on the side, we're on the east side of Abbotsford, but bringing people in, involving them, giving them space, naming them, giving them awards, bringing them in for lectures, letting people see them on campus. It's all a multi-pronged, as I said earlier, multi-pronged approach we took. And my journey personally has been very fulfilling, of course, with, as I say, with resistance along the way.
Next question is for Gira. I hope that I'm pronouncing the name correctly. So thank you for a very well articulated and thoughtful tracing of the immigration history of the South Asians. I wonder, what is your perspective on the in-group harmony of South Asians? There seems to be some troubling issues about schisms.
Yes.
Do you see the future of this group surviving as a singular cohesive immigrant group?
No, I don't see it surviving a singular cohesive group. I don't expect that. In fact, I'm hoping that our diversity becomes our strength. That I'm hoping that we, as much as we expected of Canadians to understand where we're coming from, I hope that we can do the internal healing and the internal work and the internal connections and connectivity and the foundational strengths of us as, first of all, as immigrants or children of immigrants or great-grandchildren of immigrants. That story continues to kind of embrace us and give us a sense of who we are. And then second, I suppose, is to become allies with each other, to understand each other's journeys, and to stand up and be held to hold people accountable. Also stand up when you need to. Like, allyship is so complex, because you don't just want to do performance. You want to make sure you're there for where the difficult conversations happen, and then you find solutions. I want to say, Gira, that the dominant community is looking for answers from us. And we are also looking at answers from us. We are also internally kind of gazing at ourselves and saying, what do we do? So while I have to put my hand up to say, hold on, we haven't done the internal work. Don't expect us to be this monolith that you think we are. We are fraught with our own internal tensions. And there is a limited place and space to have that discourse and dialogue. So your last comment about, do you see us becoming cohesive? I said, no, I see us becoming cohesive if we can create those spaces, those physical spaces and those psychological spaces and those cultural spaces where it's beyond dinner, dress, and dance. It's more about conflict and how we deal with it and what does it look like? How can we actually come out of it? What does the journey look like? For example, Gira, we don't have a think tank for our community. We don't project our ideas forward, 20 years forward. I would love to see that happening. Where are we going to be 20 years from now? Where will we be here 25 years from now? Because then people have a journey, a goal, a vision, an idea. And if somebody had said to me in the 70s, you'd be sitting, you'd have done your PhD, you'd be giving a talk to Royal Road, I wouldn't have believed them. Because there was no visionary pathway for young people to take. And so we as a collective, as an internal collective, have a ton of work, just like the Indigenous people have a ton of work to do within their communities. And we have to, in a sense, hold off to the dominant community to say, don't expect us to be this beautiful, sensitive, caring. We're not. And the flaw is okay, as long as I accept that it's my flaw and I can make some change. So it's not a perfect answer, but I would say we are not near yet to that goal. I hope we get there, but I hope we get to that goal.
Thank you for that answer. Okay. Yeah, my colleague Neha Sharma is asking you, Dr. Bains, in your experience, how can we better support one another as women of color in leadership to ensure that when one of us breaks a barrier, the door stays open for the rest? What does sustainable mentorship look like in a university setting today?
Yeah, it's a very, very important question and so difficult to answer. For me, the last part of your comment is about sustainability is really important. The system is not set up for sustainability. The system is set up for you to perform at the highest level that you can perform according to what the system wants from you. So keeping the door open behind you to understand there are people still waiting for the system to accept them, to understand them, to involve them, to engage them. Are you the conduit? It's a lot of work, Neha. It's a lot of work for us to take on that burden as well. You have your work, you have your commitments, you have your engagement, and then we have this eyes in the back of our heads, which say we need to also be looking back there. So I would tell you, when I came in the 70s, 80s, 90s, in the 80s and 90s, I was kind of worried that there isn't a groundswell behind us. Like there was a number of us who were feminist activists who had started women's organizations and who were interested in recording our histories and questioning tradition. And I got asked, why are you doing it? Why are you talking about violence against women? Let somebody else do it. So when we got together, we were afraid at that moment that there isn't this next generation. But actually today, I feel really fulfilled and happy that there is a generation of children and young people coming behind me that if the door is not open, they will open it themselves. But the sustainability of that is that when you get to that point, what are some of the outside the circle things that you can do to be that light that attracts other people to you? Let's find ways that we can. I always feel very positive and optimist. So I always feel very positive that if I'm going to go speak to you, Neha, if you were somewhere in a room somewhere and I came up to you and I spoke to you, I always expect that there'll be some beautiful affinity right away. Like there's an affinity. We understand. Okay, I got it. I know where you're from. I hope that affinity is the light that we carry within us that we can then pass on to the next generation. Our biggest job, our biggest success is the next generation. It might be our work too, but I think it's the next generation. It's what we've left behind. It's what's coming behind us. Because we are just here for a temporary moment of time. It's what we have created so that there's a future in terms of, so sustainability is key. Because if you come and go, then the light's gone. You have to keep that light burning. And that light needs a lot of caring and a lot of buffeting from the winds that are around us. And there are lots of those, both internal and external. But I have a lot of hope. I have a lot of hope that this is going to happen, and it is already happening.
Wow. Excellent. Okay, there is maybe it's going to be the last question from Willem.
Mm-hmm.
Is to expand on your idea of the think tank you mentioned, which is also now it's in my head now. What role do you see fourth, fifth, and later generation community members playing in supporting new immigrants and international students from the community?
Yeah, the younger generation really needs to understand that all of us need to understand that Canada is an amazing country and that everything we do here is first world. And we need to understand that our problems, the small ones that we do have, are nothing compared to what people are bringing with them to our country. And that each of us has a responsibility. There was a project in Abbotsford at one of the community schools called We Are All Related. And in that, they built a massive map and they tried to map people's journeys and who crossed where. And amazingly, every student, once they talked to each other, had some connectivity with each other. And so I feel like that community school where the mapping of our relationships needs to happen so that we don't forget the journeys that our parents and grandparents took. So the second, partly we're building the archive and we're doing the work with K-12 and we're doing the work of traveling exhibits and other things, is to keep the history present, to make people understand that this is not that far back. It's very recent. And you must not forget that the battle may be won, but the war is still going on. So I think for the second generation to understand international students and new immigrants that are coming in, just because you've come in, you can't just say, shut the door behind me. Like you have to keep that door open. You have to let people know that you understand their journeys and become, again, get a deeper appreciation. I talk as a sociologist, I talk as if society will just listen to me and become this great place. Of course, I know in reality that's not true. But we all have spheres of influence. And if in those spheres of influence, small, large, maximum size, and I'm not talking about influencers like in social media, I'm talking about deep engagement. I'm talking about not transactional relationships, but relations that last beyond the momentary, hello, how are you? Where do you come from? Beyond that. We all have a role to play. And that each of us can give more than we can take. If we can give back what we have taken, at the end of the day, I think we'd be better for it. But there's no like one pathway for anyone. Everybody has to take different routes and different pathways. I hope in the new liberal economy that, we don't say as money becomes the new God, like that we understand that money is a tool and that is for good. And how do we do that? And how do we make sure? So I'm hoping that the think tank will be a place where people can come with their ideas, and then the people who have the resources make those ideas come true and bring them both together.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and a very good place to conclude what has been a very stimulating presentation and conversation. And I see in the comments someone had mentioned having visited Poldi, and I visited Poldi too. And it's one of those remarkable places where you just suddenly get a sense of, this history which has been largely forgotten and buried. And then just this very vivid sense of what life must have been like at that time. So I would encourage folks here, because we do live on the island, to visit places like that and to get a feel for what it must have been like.
And there is a small heritage minute. It's only 60 seconds long on Palby. And Dr. Steenkamp, just take a minute. The heritage minutes are something that Historica Canada creates. And you wouldn't believe that in 127 years of history, there's not been one done on South Asians. And this was the only one that we pushed and pushed for 7 years to get done. And it's on Palby. It's in French, Punjabi, and English. 60 seconds tells a beautiful story.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. That's something I look forward to watching. And thank you, Dr. Bains. I really want to thank you so much for your time today and for opening our engagements on Asian Heritage Month in such a wonderful way. I also want to thank Alejandro, of course, for organizing this event, and to the Communications and Media Services team for their support. But also want to thank everybody for joining us here today virtually, for bringing your excellent questions. There truly were excellent questions, and for spending time with us in the space. So with that, I would say to everybody, enjoy your afternoons, and goodbye for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you from my side as well.
Okay, goodbye.